thousands of people, an unforgiving desert, and no map. How did Moses guide the people of Israel? Was it a divine GPS, a supernatural instinct, or is there a more earthly explanation for this epic journey? Get ready to question what you thought you knew about the biblical Exodus and discover the fascinating theories behind Moses' path. The idea that Moses simply found the way might seem simplistic given the magnitude of the desert crossing. However, it's crucial to understand that, even in ancient times, the desert wasn't a vacuum of geographical knowledge. On the contrary, it was a complex network of established trade routes, pastoral trails, and water sources known to generations of nomads and merchants. Egypt, from which the Israelites departed, was a vast empire, and its trade extended throughout the Near East region. There's archaeological and textual evidence of routes connecting Egypt to the Sinai Peninsula, Arabia, and the Levant. One of the best known was the Way of Horus, or King's Highway, a military and commercial route that linked Egypt to Canaan. But besides the official, patrolled routes, there were countless other less formal, yet equally important, trails that snaked through the interior of Sinai and beyond. These routes weren't just back-and-forth paths. They were corridors of knowledge, where information about the terrain, dangers, oases, food sources, and even seasonal weather patterns was exchanged and transmitted among merchants, shepherds, and caravans. Think of the vast network of informal communication that existed before modern maps. Each traveler contributed their piece of information, forming a collective, albeit undocumented, body of knowledge. This human GPS was the primary means of navigation. To illustrate, imagine today's Bedouins, who, even with modern technology, still possess an intimate and almost innate knowledge of the desert. They know every dune, every rock formation, every water source, every slight change in vegetation that might indicate the presence of resources. This wisdom is passed down from generation to generation through stories, songs, myths, and above all, through practical experience and keen observation. It's perfectly plausible that the Hebrews, many of whom lived in Egypt for centuries and interacted with diverse cultures, had access to this type of knowledge. Even if they weren't professional desert guides, their proximity to nomadic cultures, interactions with traders, and the sheer necessity of survival would have led them to absorb crucial information about the local geography. Many of them might have had prior experience with herding, which implies a basic understanding of where to find pastures and water, even in arid lands. Furthermore, it's important to consider that geographical knowledge wasn't limited to desert inhabitants. The Egyptians, for example, were masters of river navigation on the Nile and land travel along their borders. They had regular expeditions to the turquoise and copper mines in Sinai, such as those at Sarabat el-Qadim and Timna. These mines were operated for centuries, and the routes to them were not only well established but also protected and had support points. Maps, however rudimentary by our current standards, did exist. They could be pictorial representations on papyrus, like the famous Turin papyrus, which depicts a gold mine with impressive topographical details of mountains, mines, and dwellings, or even detailed route descriptions in administrative or religious texts. Egyptian intelligence about neighboring lands was vast, and certainly some of this knowledge would have been accessible to Moses, who was raised in the Egyptian court and had access to scribes and privileged information. Therefore, before considering a celestial GPS as the sole or primary explanation, we need to recognize that the groundwork for desert navigation already existed. There was an invisible map of tribal knowledge, commercial routes, and accumulated geographical information that, even without modern technologies, could have formed the foundation for the epic journey that was to come. The central theme begins here, with the understanding that human intelligence, adaptability, and accumulated knowledge were and continue to be powerful tools for exploration and survival. This practical foundation doesn't negate the dimension of faith, but contextualizes it within a scenario of remarkable human capabilities, showing that divine providence can operate through natural means and human ingenuity. If geographical knowledge and ancient roots formed the basis for Moses' path, how did he and the Israelites actually use them in their daily traverse? This is where tribal instinct and the keen observation of nature as signs manifest as crucial elements of our central theme. This wisdom was vital for survival and navigation in an environment as hostile and unforgiving as the desert. Imagine yourself in the middle of the desert, under a scorching sun, with thousands of people depending on you. There are no road signs, no GPS apps, not even modern compasses. What would you do to find your way, water, and shelter? The answer lies in the ancestral wisdom of peoples who inhabited and crossed these regions for millennia. Nomads developed a remarkable ability to read the landscape around them, interpreting every clue, however subtle, as a vital piece of information. One of the clearest and most urgent examples for survival in a desert is the search for water. Oases were vital points, and while some were well known and mapped by oral tradition, others could be discovered through subtle clues. The presence of certain plants, such as date palms, reeds, acacias, or desert shrubs with particularly green and dense leaves, indicated the proximity of surface or underground springs. Animal behavior was another infallible guide. Birds flying in a specific direction at dawn or dusk, herds of gazelles heading to a particular drinking spot, or even insects like bees, which fly in a straight line towards water, were crucial clues. Even the color and texture of the soil, the presence of salt deposits, or the configuration of certain rock formations could indicate the presence of water at deeper levels or locations where it could be dug with effort. Night navigation, in turn, depended intrinsically on the position of the stars. In an era without light pollution, the night sky in the desert was a glittering, perfectly visible map. The North Star was a fixed reference point for the northern direction, allowing the caravan to maintain a steady course. Other constellations, like the Big Dipper and Little Dipper, or even the Milky Way, could be used to determine the time and general direction. For a people primarily moving at night to avoid the excruciating heat of the day and preserve water resources, knowledge of the celestial sphere and celestial movements was an indispensable navigation tool. Furthermore, the terrain's formation itself was a guide. Mountain ranges, elevations, dry riverbeds, and depressions in the ground could serve as natural landmarks and travel corridors. Wadis, for example, although dry most of the time, were frequently used as natural paths because they offered a smoother route, protected from wind and intense sun, and often led to ancient water sources or grazing areas. They also indicated where water might flow after a rare rain, allowing travelers to prepare or find temporary wells. Observing prevailing winds, the direction of sand dunes, and unique geological features of rock formations could also provide valuable clues about direction and changes in the terrain. The tribal instinct of Moses and the elders of Israel wasn't just a mystical intuition, but rather the practical application and refinement of this collective knowledge, which developed over generations. They might have had experienced guides among them, perhaps descendants of shepherds or traders who already possessed a vast knowledge of the desert. The sheer necessity of leading such a large population would have forced Moses and his closest aides to learn and adapt these survival and navigation techniques. Moses' leadership, in this context, can be seen as the ability to synthesize, apply, and manage this knowledge, combining it with a sense of purpose and destiny for his people. It was the wisdom of guiding based on keen observation of the environment, the inheritance of centuries of desert experience, and the capacity for real-time adaptation. Moving beyond routes and natural signs brings us to a crucial aspect of our central theme: the logistics and organization necessary to move such a vast population. Traditional estimates speak of approximately 2 million people, a figure that, for the time, would have been astounding. Even if modern estimates suggest smaller numbers, the scale still represents a monumental logistical challenge. How did Moses not only find the way, but also ensure that this multitude, including women, children, the elderly, the sick, and a vast quantity of livestock, could follow this route cohesively and, most importantly, survive for 40 years in the desert? This is where we delve into the laws, patterns, or underlying mechanisms that enabled the success of this unprecedented migration. Firstly, Israel's tribal and family structure played a fundamental role. The people were organized into 12 tribes, subdivided into clans and families, and each of these units had its own leaders. This structure was not just a form of religious or genealogical identification, but an incredibly efficient social and logistical system for managing the population. The Bible describes how, at the suggestion of his father-in-law Jethro, Moses implemented a system of judges and leaders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. This delegation of authority was essential for maintaining order and discipline within such a vast population, allowing Moses to focus on larger issues of divine direction and legislation for the entire community, while the smaller leaders resolved daily disputes and organized specific tasks for their groups. Without this hierarchical and well-defined structure, chaos, disunity, and disintegration would have been inevitable, making the crossing impossible. The discipline and order of the march were vital. The Book of Numbers describes in detail the organization of the encampment and the precise order in which the tribes were to march. The tabernacle, with its mobile sanctuary, was at the center of the camp, surrounded by the Levite tribes, responsible for its assembly and transport. The other tribes were arranged in 4 groups of 3 tribes each, with their own banners and oriented towards the cardinal points. On the march, each tribe had its designated position, and the movement followed a predetermined sequence, with the leading tribes blazing the trail and the rear guard ensuring no one was left behind. This was not just a religious ritual, but a practical necessity for crowd management to avoid disorganization, delays, the loss of people or animals, and vulnerability to attacks in challenging terrain. Imagine the difficulty of coordinating thousands of people in an inhospitable environment without a clear system. The precision described in the Bible suggests meticulous planning and strict adherence to movement, patterns possibly inspired by military formations or prior van experiences. Each encampment and departure was a large-scale logistical exercise that demanded cooperation and discipline from all levels of leadership down to the common individual. Furthermore, resource management was a monumental challenge, perhaps the greatest of all. Water and food were scarce in the desert, and maintaining herds in such conditions required deep environmental knowledge and nomadic herding strategies. While the biblical narrative speaks of divine provision, from a logistical standpoint, it's plausible that the Israelites also had to utilize the water sources and natural resources they found. Knowledge of where to find these resources, whether through existing wells or techniques for digging new wells in dry wadis, would have been invaluable. Owning herds ensured a source of food, clothing, and even trade goods to acquire other necessities from peoples they encountered. Moses' ability to manage and distribute these resources, however scarce, and to implement systems for their efficient and fair use, was an essential underlying mechanism for the people's survival. This included rationing, storage, and planning for periods of scarcity and for the long distances between resupply points. Finally, effective communication was crucial. For Moses' instructions, whether about the direction of the march, civil and religious laws, or camp organization, to be followed by the entire congregation, a clear, rapid, and hierarchical communication system was necessary. Trumpet blasts, for example, were used to signal departure or encampment, to assemble leaders, or to sound an alarm. Orders and information passed from the priests and tribal leaders, and from them to the clans and families, ensuring that directives reached everyone. This chain of command and communication was one of the underlying mechanisms that allowed Moses to guide the people cohesively, even without GPS or modern sound systems. The success of the journey was not just about knowing where to go, but about how to bring everyone there together in a coordinated, safe, and sustainable way over decades. If Moses used ancient roots, tribal knowledge, and impressive logistical organization, where does the celestial GPS fit in? This is where our central theme delves into the interplay between historical, archaeological facts and the construction of a powerful narrative, focusing on the particularity of legends and the supernatural. To fully understand Moses' path, it's fundamental to recognize the power of stories and how they shape a people's perception of their own achievements and their place in the world. The story of the Exodus, as we know it through biblical texts, is permeated by grand miracles and supernatural events. The burning bush that was not consumed, the staff that turned into a serpent, the 10 plagues that afflicted Egypt and culminated in the death of the firstborn, the dramatic parting of the Red Sea for the Israelites' passage and its spectacular closing over the pursuing Egyptians, the manna that fell from the sky to feed them daily for 40 years, and the water that miraculously gushed from the rock in moments of despair. For many, these events are irrefutable proof of direct divine intervention, the very celestial GPS in action, guiding every step of the people of Israel. But for a YouTube scriptwriter exploring celestial GPS or tribal instinct, it's fascinating to consider how these narratives may have developed, solidified, and taken the form we know today over time, transforming extraordinary events into epic miracles. Think about the nature of oral tradition, which was the primary form of transmitting knowledge, history, and beliefs for millennia before widespread writing. Stories passed down from generation to generation tend to expand, embellish, and adapt to resonate with the audience and the needs of the community. Notable events, even if they have plausible natural explanations, can be interpreted and retold as direct manifestations of the divine, especially in cultures where the intervention of gods in daily life was a central and omnipresent belief. For example, a severe drought miraculously ending with the discovery of an abundant well after a sudden desert storm could be retold as God opened the rock to quench their thirst, a devastating sandstorm, or an unusual meteorological phenomenon in the Sea of Reeds that blinds and disorganizes the pursuing Egyptians, perhaps stranding them in low-tide mud, could become the Red Sea parted and swallowed the Egyptians, symbolizing divine protection and the enemy's annihilation. This doesn't diminish the spiritual and liberating significance of these events for those involved, but it offers a perspective on how faith and experience intertwine in the formation of a sacred narrative where divine power is magnified to inspire and reaffirm faith. Furthermore, the function of legends and myths in a culture is crucial. Legends and myths are not just entertainment or fairy tales. They serve to explain the inexplicable, to make sense of the world, to consolidate moral values, to establish laws, and fundamentally, to strengthen a people's identity and cohesion. The story of the Exodus, with its miraculous elements and its message of liberation, served to consolidate the Israelites' faith in one unique, powerful God, Yahweh, who is just and keeps his promises. It justifies their existence as a chosen people, united by a divine covenant, and legitimizes Moses' leadership as his messenger and guide. To say that God guided the way through a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night not only reinforces the idea of direct and constant divine intervention, but also serves as a powerful metaphor for God as safety, guidance, and protective presence amidst the unknown dangers of the desert. It was the assurance that they were not alone, but under the constant watch of their deliberator. The figure of Moses, as a prophet who speaks directly with God, also contributes immensely to this particularity of the celestial GPS. His authority comes not just from his innate wisdom, logistical skills, or ability to lead multitudes, but primarily from his unique and intimate connection with the divine. This connection is the basis for the belief that the guidance for the journey did not come from human calculations or intuition, but from a higher source. He was the channel through which divine will was revealed, including instructions on the path to follow, stopping places, laws to obey, and the ultimate destination. Faith in the celestial GPS is personified in the figure of Moses as God's chosen instrument. Therefore, the celestial GPS can be seen not just as a literal and physical manifestation of divine guidance, but also as the theological and legendary dimension that is woven over the foundation of practical knowledge and natural events. It's how a people, confronted with an extraordinary ordeal, explains and glorifies their survival and liberation, transforming an arduous Exodus journey into a divinely orchestrated saga of redemption, a story that would inspire and unite generations. The in-depth analysis of this aspect allows us to appreciate the richness, depth, and complexity of the biblical narrative, which combines the reality of human experience with the profound dimension of faith and cultural interpretation. If Moses' path involves ancient roots, tribal instinct, logistical organization, and legendary narratives, how does this story resonate and get investigated today? Our central theme unfolds in contemporary contexts through modern archaeology, geology, paleoclimatology, and the continuous, passionate debate about the exact route of the Exodus. The relentless search for physical evidence, the different theories that emerge, and the cultural resonance of the story itself demonstrate the evolution of our understanding and the human desire to connect the past to the present in a tangible way. Currently, archaeologists, historians, biblical scholars, and geographers continue to debate intensely about the exact route of the Exodus and the precise location of the biblical Mount Sinai. Different theories have been proposed over centuries, and the advent of new technologies and scientific approaches has only intensified this search. Some theories suggest a route further south in Sinai, with proponents pointing to Jabal al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia as the true Mount Sinai, based on some geological evidence and textual interpretation. Others prefer a more northern route, crossing the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula, with Jebel Musa being the traditionally accepted site for centuries. There are also hypotheses exploring coastal routes or alternative paths through the Paran Desert, seeking to correlate biblical descriptions of water sources, mountains, and geographical landmarks with current topography. The absence of direct and unequivocal archaeological evidence of a massive encampment or a clear, permanently marked route for such a large population has been one of the main points of contention and challenge for researchers. This leads to healthy skepticism and the search for new interpretations. However, this apparent lack of unequivocal proof doesn't invalidate the story itself, but rather leads us to question the scale and nature of the migration, or the preservation methods of the archaeological record. Perhaps the population wasn't as numerous as traditionally thought. Some revisionist estimates suggest tens or hundreds of thousands, not millions, which would be more manageable in logistical terms and less impactful on the archaeological record. Or perhaps the encampments were so temporary and the nomadic lifestyle so light that they left minimal traces, especially in a desert environment where organic materials decompose quickly and sandstorms can cover and shift vast expanses of land, erasing any trace within a few years or decades. Desert archaeology is notoriously difficult because extreme climatic conditions and the ephemeral nature of nomadic constructions do not favor the preservation of many artifacts or structures. Furthermore, many ancient sites might lie under layers of sand or rock that haven't yet been explored, or even be submerged due to changes in coastline. Despite the archaeological challenges and uncertainties, the story of the Exodus continues to have profound and lasting implications in various spheres of human life and contemporary thought. Religiously, it is the foundation of Jewish and Christian faith, a fundamental testimony to the liberation of a people from slavery and the divine providence that guides them toward freedom and the promised land. Historically, even if its exact scale and route are debated, the Exodus represents one of the oldest and most influential accounts of a mass migration, and continues to be a case study for demographers and social historians. Culturally, the Exodus inspires and resonates in liberation and resistance movements against oppression worldwide. From Martin Luther King Jr., leading the civil rights movement in the United States, to anti-slavery movement struggles for national autonomy and human rights in various nations and eras. The image of a people seeking freedom and a promised land is a powerful and universal metaphor for human hope and resilience. The debate over celestial GPS or tribal instinct is not just an academic exercise. It reflects the intrinsic tension between faith and reason, between religious narrative and the search for scientific evidence, which often permeates our understanding of the past. The search for tangible evidence doesn't necessarily diminish faith, but offers new perspectives and nuances on how extraordinary events might have unfolded, enriching our understanding. Our era's ability to use tools like geographic information systems, remote sensing, computational modeling, and paleoclimatology offers a modern and analytical GPS to try and understand Moses' journey in new ways. These technologies allow us to simulate the ancient desert, its potential routes, and the logistical challenges of a mass exodus in a way that was never before possible. Thus, the Exodus, even with its layers of mystery and debate, remains a central theme that continues to challenge us to explore the intersections between what we believe, what we know, and what we can still discover about the incredible and monumental journey of the people of Israel. It serves as a reminder that the great narratives of the past continue to be fertile ground for investigation, contemporary reflection, and human inspiration. After exploring ancient roots and inherited knowledge, the wisdom of observing nature, the complex leadership and logistics of a mass migration, the transformative power of legends, and the intensification of modern archaeological debate, we arrive at the final point of our central theme, a reflection on the limits of our understanding. Moses' path confronts us with the vastness of time, the inherent imperfection of historical records, and the complexity of events that, at their core, transcend pure material logic and the ability to be fully grasped by our current investigative methods. What does this persistent mystery reveal about our perception, and what, perhaps, may still transcend our understanding? No matter how much archaeology advances with new techniques like more precise excavations, drones for mapping, and isotope analysis for dating, no matter how much historiography refines its analysis of ancient texts, comparing different translations and cultural contexts, and no matter how much science and technology try to reconstruct the past with precision and simulations, there is always a point where factual knowledge meets its undeniable limits. In the case of the Exodus, the scarcity of definitive material evidence for a mass migration of millions of people who lived in the desert for 40 years is one of these most evident limits. This does not mean that the story didn't happen or that it is a mere invention. It means that it's complete and verifiable understanding through our purely empirical and positivist methods may be beyond our capacity for proof. It is a powerful reminder of the fragility of human records in the face of the vastness of time and the ephemeral nature of many ancient lives and cultures. This gap, this space between what we can prove and what is narrated, invites us to consider the nature of truth and history itself. Historical truth is often multifaceted, composed not only of verifiable facts, but also of cultural interpretations, collective beliefs, transmitted memories, and the profound meaning an event acquires for those who experienced it and for future generations. For the Israelites, and for billions of people around the world, The Exodus was not merely a physical crossing from point A to point B. It was a spiritual journey of liberation from oppressive slavery, of purification, and of the formation of a unique national and religious identity inseparable from their faith. In this sense, the celestial GPS can be understood as unwavering faith in a divine direction and purpose, a driving force that transcends any earthly map and gave meaning to every hardship, every despair, and every challenge faced. It was the moral and spiritual compass that guided them. What the central theme, Moses' path, celestial GPS, or tribal instinct, teaches us is that reality can be a rich and complex tapestry, woven with threads of different natures that complement, rather than negate, each other. The practical wisdom and accumulated knowledge of centuries were, undoubtedly, vital and rational components for survival and navigation in such a hostile environment. The ability to read nature, to organize people and resources, to plot efficient routes, and to adapt to the elements, all of this demonstrates impressive human intelligence, resilience, and ingenuity. But faith, the belief in a higher power that guides, protects, and provides, was what gave meaning, purpose, and hope to the journey, transforming an arduous and grueling migration into a foundational event of a civilization and a religion. One dimension does not exclude the other. They intertwine and complement each other, forming a complete and powerful narrative that continues to resonate. The story of Moses in the desert, therefore, is not just a historical puzzle to be solved exclusively by science. It reminds us that there are dimensions of human experience, unwavering hope, transformative faith, the overcoming of the seemingly impossible, transcendental meaning that escape our capacity for purely scientific measurement and explanation. The mystery surrounding Moses' path is not a sign of a failure of understanding or an insurmountable barrier, but an invitation to intellectual humility and awe. It urges us to recognize that even in a world increasingly mapped, scrutinized, and explained by science, there are still wonders, phenomena, and profound narratives that force us to ponder the limits of our knowledge and the possibility that the inexplicable, beyond the strict confines of science, still exists, shaping human history and faith in ways that continue to fascinate and inspire us. Moses' path, an enigma spanning millennia, challenges us to look beyond the obvious. Was it ancient desert wisdom, human organization, or divine guidance that led the people? Perhaps the truth is a fascinating blend of it all, where pragmatism and faith intertwine in one of humanity's greatest sagas. What other mysteries of history await our curiosity and our incessant search for understanding?